He was only supposed to stay one night. That's what the man told himself as he knelt in the snow, pulling the frozen body against his chest. One night, just long enough to thaw the ice from its fur and call someone who knew what to do with wild things. But by morning something had changed, and it wasn't just the bobcat. The cold had settled over the city like a weight, not the kind of winter cold that comes gradually, giving you time to prepare, but the sudden brutal kind that arrives overnight and doesn't ask permission. The man had worked late, later than he'd planned, and the streets were nearly empty when he finally headed home. His breath formed clouds in the frozen air. His boots crunched through fresh snow that had already begun to harden into ice. He wasn't looking for anything. He was just trying to get home. But then he saw it. A small shape beneath the street lamp, pressed against the base of a chain-link fence. At first he thought it was trash. A discarded coat, maybe, or a pile of leaves blown against the metal by the wind. He almost kept walking. Almost. But something about the way it sat there, completely still in the middle of a storm, made him stop. He approached slowly, squinting through the falling snow. When he got close enough to crouch down, his heart sank. Fur, matted and stiff with ice. A tiny body curled so tightly it looked like it was trying to disappear into itself. A kitten, he thought. Some poor stray that didn't make it through the night. He brushed the snow away gently, carefully, and that's when he saw the markings. The spotted coat, the oversized paws, the tufted ears barely visible beneath the frost. This wasn't a kitten, it was a bobcat. Young, maybe 2 months old if that. Its eyes were closed, its mouth slightly open. Breath so faint he had to lean in close just to see the barest rise and fall of its tiny chest. He'd seen bobcats before, but only from a distance. Shadows slipping through the woods at dusk, prints in the mud by the creek. He knew they were wild. He knew they didn't belong here, in neighborhoods, under street lamps, freezing to death in the snow. But he also knew he couldn't leave it. He pulled off his coat without thinking, wrapping the kitten inside and folding the fabric around its small, rigid body. It didn't move, didn't react. He held it close against his chest and started walking, faster now, boots slipping on ice as the wind howled behind him. The house was warm when he pushed through the front door, but the bobcat didn't stir. He carried it straight to the kitchen, laid it gently on the table under the overhead light, and got to work. Heating pads, warm towels, not hot, never hot. He'd read somewhere that you never warm a frozen animal too quickly. Shock could kill it just as easily as the cold. He wrapped the kitten carefully, layer by layer, checking constantly for breath, for a heartbeat, for any sign that it was still fighting. The minutes stretched into hours. Midnight became 1 a.m., then 2. He sat beside the table, one hand resting lightly on the towel, feeling for the faint rhythm of breathing. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional groan of old pipes adjusting to the cold outside. He told himself he'd call a wildlife rescue center in the morning. Someone trained. Someone who actually knew what they were doing. This was temporary. Just one night. Just long enough to make sure it didn't die alone in the snow. Then he heard the soft padding of paws on the hardwood floor. Milo appeared in the doorway. The gray tabby stopped at the edge of the kitchen. White paws planted firmly, crooked tail held high. His green eyes were fixed on the bundle on the table. His whiskers twitched. His ears swiveled forward. The man straightened, suddenly tense. He knew how this could go. Cats were territorial. Cats hissed at strangers. Cats didn't take kindly to wild things being brought into their space, especially not predators. But Milo didn't hiss. He moved closer, slow and deliberate, the way cats do when they're deciding whether something is worth their attention. He sniffed the air, sniffed the edge of the towel. Then, with a grace that seemed impossible for something so ordinary, he hopped onto the table and sat down beside the bobcat. The man held his breath. Milo leaned in, nose touching the bobcat's tiny frozen ear, and then, without hesitation, he began to groom. Not cautiously, not aggressively, just grooming. Long, steady licks across the kitten's head, down its neck, over the stiff fur still crusted with frost. His rough tongue worked methodically, carefully, as if he'd done this 1,000 times before. The man stared, unable to move, unable to process what he was watching. This shouldn't be happening. Domestic cats didn't do this. They didn't adopt wild predators. They didn't mother things that could grow up to hunt them. But Milo didn't seem to know that. The bobcat's breathing deepened, just slightly, just enough to notice. Its tiny paws twitched, and Milo kept grooming, purring now, a low, steady rumble that filled the quiet kitchen like a second heartbeat. The man sat back slowly, exhausted, bewildered, and strangely moved. He didn't understand what was happening. He didn't know why Milo had chosen this moment, this creature to care for. But he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't going to be just one night. Morning light filtered through the kitchen window, pale and cold. The man woke with a start, his neck stiff from sleeping in the chair. For a moment he'd forgotten where he was. Then he saw them. Milo was curled tightly around the bobcat on the table, his body forming a perfect crescent. The kitten was tucked against his chest, nose buried in gray fur. And for the first time since the man had found it in the snow, the bobcat's breathing was strong, steady, its tiny paws stretched out in sleep, then curled back in. It was going to survive. The man stood slowly, not wanting to disturb them. He reached for his phone to call the wildlife center, but stopped. Just a few more hours, he thought. Let it get a little stronger first. Those hours turned into days. The bobcat began to eat, small amounts at first, then more eagerly. It stumbled when it tried to walk, legs still weak, but Milo was always there, circling it, steadying it with his body, bringing toys to its makeshift bed, and dropping them at its feet like offerings. When the bobcat cried, a thin, desperate sound that didn't belong to anything wild, Milo meowed back, loud and insistent, until the man came running. The man tried to separate them once, worried that Milo might get hurt as the bobcat grew stronger. He moved the kitten to a crate in the spare room. Milo sat outside the door and howled for 3 straight hours. When the man finally opened it, Milo shot inside, climbed into the crate, and curled around the bobcat, as if nothing had happened. The man gave up trying after that. Over the next 2 weeks, something remarkable unfolded. The bobcat learned to play, pouncing on Milo's tail, batting at dangling strings, leaping with a precision that seemed instinctive. But it also learned gentleness, head bumps, slow blinks, the careful, affectionate manners of a house cat. Yet wildness was never far beneath the surface. The bobcat climbed curtains with ease. It stalked invisible prey across the living room floor. Its eyes tracked movement with an intensity Milo had never shown. The man watched them together on the couch one evening, Milo grooming the bobcat's ears while it purred, a sound deeper and rougher than any house cat, and felt something shift inside him. This wasn't temporary anymore. He'd been telling himself it was, that any day now, he'd make the call, that someone else would come and take the bobcat to where it belonged. But watching Milo's devotion, the way the bobcat trusted him completely, the man realized something he hadn't wanted to admit. Letting go was going to break both their hearts, and he wasn't sure any of them were ready for that. 3 weeks became 6, and the bobcat grew. Not gradually the way Milo had grown as a kitten, but rapidly, almost alarmingly. Its legs lengthened, its paws thickened, the soft baby fur gave way to a sleeker, more muscular coat. When it played now, there was real power behind each pounce, real strength in its jaws. Milo didn't seem to notice, or maybe he didn't care. They still wrestled on the living room floor, the bobcat now nearly twice Milo's size. They still curled together in the sun, their breathing synchronized. But the man noticed the difference. He saw the way the bobcat's eyes tracked birds through the window, the way it tensed at distant sounds. Milo ignored completely. He finally made the call. The woman at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center was kind but direct. "He's healthy," she said after reviewing the photos the man had sent. "That's good. That means he's ready for the next step. We can start transitioning him back to the wild." The man's throat tightened. "And if I wait longer, then it gets harder," she said gently. For everyone. He built an enclosure in the backyard, larger than he'd planned. Tall platforms, hiding spots, open space to run. The bobcat explored it immediately, leaping from perch to perch with breathtaking agility, stalking insects through the grass, scenting the air with his nose high. He looked wild out there, like he belonged to the forest, not a house. But every evening without fail the bobcat pressed against the glass door that led inside, watching, waiting, looking for Milo, and Milo always came, sitting on the other side of the glass, paw pressed to paw, separated by a barrier that might as well have been a canyon. The man stood in the doorway one night, watching them, and felt his chest constrict. Was he doing the right thing? Returning the bobcat to the wild was what nature demanded, what the experts recommended, what any reasonable person would do. But Milo wasn't reasonable. Milo had chosen this bond, had nursed a wild predator back to life with nothing but instinct and love. And now the man was about to take that away. He sat down on the porch steps, head in his hands. The bobcat had grown strong, independent, capable of surviving on its own. Everything the man had hoped for. But the stronger the bobcat became, the harder the decision felt, because letting him go meant breaking something neither Milo nor the man had ever asked for, but both had come to need. Spring arrived slowly, then all at once, the snow melted, the trees budded, and the bobcat grew into something magnificent, sleek, powerful, unmistakably wild. The day came on a Saturday morning. Clear sky, warm breeze, the kind of day that felt like a beginning, even when it was an ending. The wildlife team arrived at dawn. They were professional, compassionate. They explained the process gently, supervised release in a protected area, monitoring for the first few weeks, ensuring he could hunt and survive on his own. The man walked the enclosure one last time with Milo at his side. The bobcat approached them both, nuzzling the man's hand, then pressing his forehead against Milo's in that slow, deliberate way they'd done 100 times before. Then, with one last look, the bobcat turned and walked into the open forest. He didn't look back. The house felt empty afterward. Too quiet, too still. Milo wandered from room to room crying softly, a thin, mournful sound the man had never heard from him before. He checked the enclosure, sat by the glass door, waited for a friend who wasn't coming home. The man wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. Weeks passed. The crying stopped, but Milo seemed smaller somehow, less present. The man checked his phone obsessively for updates from the wildlife team. Thriving, they said, hunting successfully, fully independent. It should have been a relief. It wasn't. Then one evening in late April the man checked his trail camera, something he'd set up weeks ago and almost forgotten about. His breath caught. There at the edge of the tree line stood the bobcat, bigger now, healthier than ever, coat gleaming in the fading light. But he wasn't moving. He was just watching the house. The man scrolled to the audio file, played it, and there, faint but unmistakable, were 2 soft meows recorded in response to Milo's cries from the porch. The man's eyes burned. He opened the back door. Milo rushed out immediately, as if he'd been waiting for this exact moment. The bobcat stepped closer, not all the way, but close enough for Milo to touch his nose, close enough to remember. They stood like that for a long moment, wild and tame, separated and together. Then the bobcat turned and slipped back into the shadows. The man knelt beside Milo on the porch, hand resting gently on the cat's back. "He's okay," he whispered. "He's home." And so were they. He was only supposed to stay one night, but he left a bond that would last a lifetime.